All right. So before I'm going to dive into my 45-minute long monologue, I really love always to check out a little bit who is in the audience and to see actually if maybe this talk hopefully makes sense and I'm not going to bore you too much. Who in this audience actually considers himself as a creative leader? Okay, quite a few. Who is leading small to large teams? I love when it's not the same people. Who had any sort of leadership training? Oh, pretty cool. That's new. Who feels really confident that they really know about how to lead great teams and how to shape great creative processes? Come on, one? Last time it was one, it was Emily who is coming after this. So it always, when the hands don't go, I wait for the moment where all the hands go up and I'm like, I'm leaving and please talk to me because there's no reason that I'm standing up here, but it seems like it's a good reason and a good topic to talk about. So about 6 years ago, I left Berlin, where I've been a partner in a pretty classic graphic design studio, and I came actually here to Toronto to join Bruce Mao Design as the Associate Creative Director for the Brands and Environments team. And my former partner is sitting there, and he hates that I'm calling it I'm out. But he's amazing. So I came here, and I was super excited about this new role, and I was super excited to learn from my creative director on how to lead these far more complex projects and how to lead these multidisciplinary teams. And about 2 months later, the creative director was gone, and I was in charge of around 15 people who were working simultaneously on about 6 projects. That was, let's say, slightly unsettling. And it seems to me that actually many of us sort of stumble into these roles, right, of like becoming an art director, becoming a creative director, and mainly because we've been good designers. But while I think it's really important that we are rooted in our craft, it's a really different skill set to mentor, to lead, and to guide teams. And so, and also to manage client expectations. So the lucky ones have had some really good role models that is sort of that helped them to grow slowly and naturally into it. And the rest of us, we were just trying to somehow do our best and trying to figure it out. So in my case, that meant a lot of trial and error. That meant a lot of tears and epiphanies, and also a lot of setbacks and breakthroughs. And it has been an ongoing inquiry ever since on how to generate ideas that actually generate ideas in others, how to push projects really beyond mediocrity, and how to push people outside of their comfort zone, but not pushing them off the cliff. I've done both. So in the next 40 minutes, I would like to share some of my findings from this investigation. But first, I want to give you a little bit of context about local projects, where I'm currently a creative director, while also leading the visual experience design department. And in the end, I will run you through a case study, and then hopefully maybe we'll have some time for questions either here or or somewhere down or out. Local projects. We're in New York. We're a pretty vibrant international group of around 60 people. We're architects, graphic, motion, UX designers, technologists, content developers, strategists, project managers, producers. And what brings us together are basically 2 things. One, ambition. That's why people come to New York. And a sincere curiosity for new approaches to storytelling and human interaction within the public space. So we are basically trying to break the habitual patterns on how visitors usually engage with content. These are some examples of from our prototyping phases. And the studio was initially mostly focusing on media installations, like this City Pulse at the One World Observatory. It's a ring of screens with a custom motion control system that is connected to the arm of the guides and basically lets them create their own augmented story based on their personal interests. Or this installation for the Tech Museum of Innovation, where visitors can learn about the alteration of life forms. We're probably best known for signature pieces like 9/11, the museum where we are displaying and collecting thousands. Oops. Thank you. Very kind. And for you. Collecting thousands of people's memories instead of presenting one official narrative. Let me see. Still flickering?
On the day of September 11th, 2001.
On September 11th.
On September 11th.
I was in Honolulu, Hawaii.
Cairo, Egypt. Des Champs-Élysées à Paris.
In college at UC Berkeley.
I was in Times Square in
São Paulo do Brasil.
Estava em Miami, Florida.
Scottish Highlands.
We were actually in a meeting when someone barged in and said,
Oh my God, the plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center.
Kind of frantically get to a radio.
When I heard it over the radio.
Many of you might be familiar with the interactive pen that we created for the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum. Visitors can use it to basically assemble their personal collection, but also to be creative themselves and learn about design basically by designing themselves. And we're going to do a totally elegant little swap as if like it's totally cool. Not making me nervous. I've not been nervous before either. All right. Play. Chuck. Yes? Designing by designing themselves. Oops. Okay. This should be a video. And this should play. Yeah. So they can also design these crazy patterns on steroids in the wallpaper immersion room where they can basically literally draw on the walls. And that's not necessarily the usual kind of behavior that we do in museums, but it really exemplifies one of our mantra, which is learning by doing at its best. It's also a social media hit. We also developed the collections wall for the Cleveland Museum of Art, which allows visitors to to simultaneously browse around 4,000 artworks and then collect them and author their own individual tour through the museum. As well as one of our crazy ideas from 2013. Visitors literally make a face to browse and select artworks from the collection. And again, not the typical passive and tamed way that we usually engage with content at museums. And as you all know, then Google came and turned the idea of using facial recognition to find your art doppelganger into the first viral app of 2018. We're not owning the idea. We were just first. But we also evolved and are now actually creating mainly exhibitions and entire museums like the Legacy Museum for the Equal Justice Initiative, which will open at the end of this month. And it will be the first museum to reveal the full story of Black oppression in America. From slavery through lynching and terror, the era of segregation, all the way up to today's mass incarceration epidemic. Last fall, we opened the Mithraeum, a new archaeology museum in London. It's centered around the restored ruins of the Temple of Mithras. It's a Roman cult that is actually pretty mystical in itself. So we were using haze and sound and sheets of light in order to recreate the temple and basically bring the ruins back to life. So we basically evolved from a media installation firm into a full-service experience and exhibition design studio, and we engage in storytelling through the lenses of all of these disciplines, and we have all of these disciplines in-house. And advertising break, if you're an amazing creative technologist, you can be really, really nerdy, you like our work, and you're a nice human being, go to our website, we're hiring, there's a career section, and back. So as a creative director, it's my responsibility and my opportunity to lead projects, to lead teams, and also to lead the client engagement across these disciplines. And so for me, the big questions are, what shapes a great creative leader? And how to shape a successful creative process that leads to original and meaningful solutions. And before I'm going to dive more into my findings in that regard, I want to call out two things. The first, leadership is a practice. It's not something that you learn during a weekend's course or by reading a book. It's an ongoing practice, and to practice means to show up. And with the wonderful words of the amazing researcher Brené Brown, if we're committed to creating what has not existed before, then we have to choose courage as a value and show up in the arena. And there's only one guarantee: you will get your ass kicked. If you don't know her yet, check out her TED Talk and her U99 talk. She's amazing. So I'm standing here to talk about leadership, not because I was born with perfect leadership skills, but because I find actually myself and again outside of my comfort zones, confronted with my limitations, but really fiercely committed to grow beyond. So I'm standing here because I'm committed to vigilant introspection, even and especially when it's really uncomfortable. I'm standing here because I don't shy away of conflict, may it be internal or external. I'm standing here because it's been so empowering for me to, when others actually shared their stories with authenticity and in full transparency. I'm standing here because I want to contribute to a more conscious leadership culture. And I'm standing here because I want to see more female role models. And that brings me actually to a pretty interesting subject, male versus female leadership traits. So stereotypes, as well as research findings, describe gender-specific tendencies. So male leaders tend to be more confident, more dominant, more courageous, as well as more competitive. They tend to be mostly focused on the goals and the rewards. They are task and performance-oriented and often known for their aggressive drive. So it's pretty much this, there it is, let's go get it, let's get shit done. Female leaders tend to be more mindful, more empathetic, more inspirational, and more collaborative. So they tend to be more focused on the process and the relationships and a little less in the outcome. And they're often known for that they really care. So female leaders basically ask you how you're feeling about a project, and male leaders ask for a progress update. So it's basically the heart and the drive. Yeah? And I think it's pretty evident that we actually need both. We need the left brain and the right brain if we want to create sustainable environments, come up with original ideas, and get them done and get them built. So I think it's really helpful to understand these tendencies as archetypes, but not to think that we are limited and sort of like stuck in either box. So in my case, for example, it's quite a meandering between the polarities, and it frankly can be pretty hard for my team, which one of my designers can probably agree to, because they kind of never exactly know what they're getting. And if I would sum it up, it's probably, I really care aggressively. So my point is, we have all of these aspects within us. They're just more or less developed due to nature, nurture, and social expectations. And it's pretty much our decision, it's our responsibility, and it's our freedom, no matter if we identify as male, as female, as neither or both, which are the qualities that we want to foster, and which are the qualities that we want to tackle. So, without further ado, here is my Edit to Amplify version of 6 core principles for thriving creative leadership. Leadership 101, we need to be able to set a vision. We need to know how to get there and basically define and manage the process. We need to be able to make decisions when nobody else can. We need to communicate and connect to a real wide range of audiences. We need to be willing to nurture and invest in people. And last but not least, I swear I'm working on it, become emotionally rock solid when the shit hits the fan. Let's start with the vision. Everything we do is colored by our intention. And so as a creative leader, we need to basically be able to translate our intention into a vision and to make it so inspiring that our people, as well as the client, are actually willing to go the extra mile and to step out of their comfort zone. So setting the vision is really a key part for each and every project. People might like money and fame. I do too, even though it scares the shit out of me when I'm like up here. But we really connect to purpose and meaning and basically to whatever we want to see so much more in this world. And I think as creative leaders, as well as individual designers, we really have to find our own truth in that regard, because nobody can fake excitement long-term without burning out. So in my case, this relates to one of my biggest passions. I'm practicing meditation for about 10 years now, and if there's any decency in my personality, then it's probably thanks to my teachers and my practice. And if I take the essence of it, then it's really about disrupting the logic of the everyday in order to be in the here and now. And for me, that is the most precious thing that I can potentially offer to other people. Because it allows us to engage in a mindset of possibilities. Whoops. And I want to create these moments that are so compelling, that are so beautiful or provocative or weird, that we stop thinking, at least for a moment, about all the dramas in our life, so that our minds can open up. I want to enrich our environments with meaning, with beauty, and with surprise. And I want to create atmospheres that really touch people on a visceral level. I pretty much want anything but mediocrity. And so I think it's our job as creative directors to take what's at the core of our passion and basically remix it with the mission of the client, and then frame a tangible vision on a project-by-project basis. So pointing the finger towards the moon is the first step, but then we also need to know how to get there. And we have to be sort of these inspiring visionaries, but in a studio environment like ours, we also have to be managers. This might sound a little bit like a contradiction, but creatives need freedom to play. And most of them are actually highly sensitive people, and they identify a lot and far too much, and sometimes completely with their work, and they're highly anxious to fail. And it became pretty evident to me over the years that it's so crucial to have a solid project management in such a fast-paced and high-pressure environment like ours. So it's basically this like really clearly outlined process that defines short-term tasks and deliverables and connects them to the bigger picture. That's what actually facilitates the framework to play, because it allows basically creatives to focus on ideation and design instead of spending their energy on feeling overwhelmed all the time. And there are two tangible process tools that I really value and that I use a lot and that I want to share. The first one is a pretty precious learning from my time at Bruce Ma Design here, where the design process is very much driven by research and engaging stakeholders instead of isolated ideation. So it's about taking really the time at the beginning through research, interviews, and workshops, and whatever is needed to really understand the purpose and the potential of the project, but also and especially the landscape of personalities and the individual aspirations within that. And the magic trick for me is in the middle. It's when we distill those insights, translate them into design principles, and get them signed off by the client before we start ideation. It's a really great recipe if you want to avoid taste discussions, which is pretty much what I hate the most, or if you also don't like when your client takes your concept to then clarify their internal tensions. If anybody had that before. So let me share a case study to make this a little bit more tangible. This is the visual identity that we developed for Bronx Music Hall in advance of designing their exhibition. So we synthesized basically everything we heard from the client as well as from our research into these key insights, translated those into brand guidelines, and then defined what that means for the look and feel. Then we discussed visual references with the client to actually clarify what those words actually mean, because what means bold to me probably is different than what means bold to you. And it's also a really good tool to just basically test the aesthetic sensibilities. We clarified tensions, and then got sign-off on the insights and design principles. And this is what then actually becomes the brief for the creatives internally, but also the framework for the feedback when you go back to for your first client presentation. So here we went back with 3 rough concepts. They had to choose one, and the final direction was then developed under this working title, Keep on Pushing. It's based on a customized font system that has glyphs with these extended letters for the B, the M, and the H. And that basically creates this very unique visual rhythm for each and every text that you set. The word mark shifts into a monogram. It can be animated and turned into a kinetic sculpture or some fun swag. And the image treatment is basically just taking a vertical pixel line and stretching it horizontally. And this really helped us to create some sort of a visual coherence across the really diverse range of image material. And then we applied it across a variety of applications, like the event posters or the more sophisticated sisters here, as well as stage branding and exterior signage. And we are currently working on their exhibition. The second tool is prototype first, and it's very much local projects process mantra. And to me, it's actually even more mentality that blends into everything. So we don't only prototype work, we also prototype the way we work and how we work together. And my absolute favorite example in that regard is actually from Ivy Ross, who's the VP of product design at Google. She observed that teams who are actually on the same wavelength produce better outputs. So she actually literally created a room with sound baths where basically you have binaural frequencies that stimulate both hemispheres of your brain, and literally brought the teams on the same wavelengths. That is process innovation. Blows my mind. So much respect. And at LP, we try to prototype really as early as possible. So no matter how rough and raw, it's really about getting out of your head and getting into the real experiences as soon as possible. So putting things up in real size, no matter if it's analog or digital. A huge part of what visitors actually experience in the final installation really comes and forms during prototyping. And when in doubt, use a cat. My third point is decisiveness, or the courage to make difficult decisions when actually nobody else can. And that comes with the necessity to hold ourselves and others accountable. And that does not mean to point fingers and to blame or shame. Accountability means to take responsibility and to take action and finding new solutions when the old ones collapse. And it's very different. Our principal, Jake Barton, always says that having a strong point of view is worth about 70 IQ points. We need to have a strong point of view if we want to get out of the sort of mediocrity chill-out zone. And that also means that we need to face conflicts, and we need to be able to do that. And in the words of a dear friend, it's not about pleasing everybody. We are not tacos. So we have to let go of what other people actually might think of us and choose integrity over approval. And that can be especially challenging for women, because most of us grew up with sort of a social expectation that women should be first and foremost desirable, A, through beauty, and B, accommodating behavior. So with that in mind, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision that something is more important than fear. And if we want to become more present with whatever is, instead of defaulting into anger or to defaulting to withdrawal, which are basically the two versions when fear arises, then curiosity is actually our best friend. If we're just a little bit more curious than anxious in any situation, we will not run away and we will not withdraw. So curiosity is really the antidote to fear. Communication. Obviously, massive topic, can fill and does fill its own conferences. And luckily, Berman Painter addressed this topic far more in depth yesterday, which was really lovely. But I would like to call out and reinforce one of the things that I think is so critical and crucial for us as designers and team leaders. The most important thing about communication is listening. And I don't mean to just wait until the other one is finished so we can make our point. Do you know these moments when you zoom in on the mouth of the other person? Just waiting for it to stop moving while you completely obsessively try to hold on to your thought because you're so afraid that totally guilty. But I'm actually talking about listening with empathy and with intent to truly understand where the other one is coming from, to authentically care, and to actually ask questions because we want to hear the answer. So when we actually understand who is sitting across from us, when we sort of connect as human, it's also so much easier for ourselves to address our needs. And when we actually understand our audience, then it's so much easier to adapt the way we present our ideas based on their point of interest. So that brings me somehow to mentorship, not the most fluid transition, but if we want our engagements to be scalable and if we want long-term sustainability, we have to invest in people first and projects second. And this can be really painful, and I know what I'm talking about. Because you might have to go through a phase where the output is actually not as good and not on the level where it would be if all your energy would go into the project itself instead of training the people to sort of master them. And for me, mentorship means sitting down with designers and showing them all my tricks, but also making sure that they sort of share their superpowers with each other. It's putting more than one designer on a project and sort of create a healthy competition between them, but also encouraging collaboration. I'm forcing, sometimes, designers to actually play ping pong with their files instead of just sort of critiquing each other. It's a really good ego killer. And it's also taking the time for pretty thorough performance reviews where we together sort of lay out the next growth opportunities and how to tackle them. And that takes quite a lot of time. And it's also pushing them outside of their comfort zone when it's necessary, because then they can actually experience the satisfaction of true achievement, but then also giving them a time to take a breath afterwards. And for me, maybe the most critical thing personally, it's about showing up and facing my own struggles, because then I can coach them just so much better with their struggles. And it's reminding myself again and again, I wish it was my t-shirt, but they made it for our CFO. It's reminding myself again and again to really focus on everyone's qualities and not on the shortcomings, including myself. And this can be pretty hard because I come from a culture of perfectionism. And I really don't think that this is a virtue anymore. Not at all, actually, because it really keeps everybody small. Which leads me a little bit more fluid to my last point, which is emotional stability. So when I left BMD, I really begged my CFO to give me some honest and critical feedback, and he said a lot of really nice things, and then he said this one thing. Just remember, whenever you're inspired and passionate, your whole team is flying with you. And whenever you're frustrated and angry, they're all coming down with you. And so many great leaders are known for their tremendous drive and their passion and their energy. And it very, very often seems to come with a tendency to react very aggressively to frustrations. And what happens when a leader has issues with impulse control can be observed daily in my least favorite opera, The White House Saga. So the design industry has actually a pretty huge legacy of creative geniuses that ruled by sort of like rage. And it's so enticing because it can bring amazing short-term results. So if I get into panic mode because the work is nowhere close to what I expected, and if I throw a tantrum, I know that the work will be amazing the next day. It will save the moment, and it's not sustainable. Not for me, not for my team. I'm completely depleted afterwards, and I feel like shit, and my team feels completely humiliated and is pissed off. But the work is great the next day. And I'm 100% convinced that anxiety actually kills creativity. Our perception and awareness really goes into tunnel mode and into tunnel vision mode when we are in either fight, flight, or freeze. And so we can be very fast in executing sort of like tasks that we already know very well, but there's no space basically for free association, and that is what leads to new ideas. So how to be assertive without being aggressive? How to rest more easily in discomfort? How to be more responsive and less reactive? Fact is that whenever we are overstretched and depleted, our coping skills start to fray. And so I think of self-care as team care. So whatever helps you to replenish and create more space between trigger and reaction, may it be meditation, yoga, nature, friends, movies, making out with your partner or your lover, or ideally they're both at the same time, or working out in a fitness center, you name it, make it a priority. Which feels like a great transition to my final case study. This is our project for the ARoS Art Museum in Denmark. We were asked to develop a series of interactive installation for their new education floor. And the provocative mandate from the museum's director, Elle was to create a mental fitness center. And he has been really an incredible role model for what it means to be an inspiring leader. He has a very clear vision for the museum. He wants to make art relevant for society at large. And he has outlined a truly impressive master plan on how to get there. And he's built a team around him that is completely aligned with his vision. And they have an incredible amount of freedom and trust. And all of his people are actually empowered to make real decisions, which is really rare in institutions. And he has the courage to not just play the game, but redefine the game. He has the courage to shift the power paradigm and break all the rules. We did and came up with concepts for them that no other art museum would accept. All my curator friends were just like, I don't want to talk about you. Like, oh my God, like, can't do this with art. But the museum has over 1.5 million visitors, which is fairly impressive for a city that has about 300,000 inhabitants and is somewhere nowhere in Denmark. So Erland liked all of our signature pieces, and he was very clear that he wanted none of that. He wanted us to support a social space where the museum is basically talking with the visitors and not as an authority to the people. He wanted a space where art is relevant because it tells us something about ourselves and about others. So we kicked the project off at the museum with a bunch of workshops. And then I created this studio-wide brainstorm, which I thought was not just fun, but also kind of clever. So I had laid out all of the touch points for a physical fitness center and then asked basically how these stations would translate into a mental fitness center. And we got a lot of fun stickies, but the exercise was a complete failure in regard to producing useful ideas. Number of ideas pursued, 0. So the main insight for me out of this was that it's really hard to ideate on the spot when you don't have a lot of context and you don't have incubation time before. So after that, what I always do is that I basically brief the team several days, ideally sort of like have a weekend in between before we actually start ideation. So for this project, we landed on 3 installations for the final concept, an eye tracking station, a portrait machine, and a recording booth. And we immediately started to prototype in-house. For 2 instances, we used this transparent OLED screen. It was a brand new technology that has just sort of come out on a trade show. And everybody in the studio was super excited because finally Minority Report was there. But the screens came not only with a 6 weeks delay, which is not so much funny, is not so funny when you have 3 months, but they also came with a series of growing pains, and actually in the meantime they're taken off the market, and so ARoS is the only institution that actually has this technology. But the biggest issue was that our main assumption for the portrait machine turned out to be wrong. So we wanted to create this sort of real-time, dynamic, layered portrait collage of a person with the artwork, but the eye does not connect the 2 spatial layers into one image. So it basically jumps back and forth between the person and the artwork. So we did many, many rounds of iterations and then reviewed the prototypes together with the ARoS team at our studio. And we kind of like wanted to see if the concepts are actually holding up as experiences. So they basically don't sign off on a keynote. They come, they walk through it, and then you continue working based on the feedback. We wanted to see if the experiences actually triggered the kind of unexpected insights that we were looking for, if they provoke the personal and the intimate conversations, that are actually worth sharing. And so our first installation is the so-called eye catcher, where we challenge the visitors to focus for about 10 seconds on a single artwork. We track the eye movement and then show a series of sort of hidden details behind how you look at art, like the details you focused on, or the number of fixations which are directly correlated to how well you will remember the artwork. Research shows that visitors spend on average between 5 to 30 seconds in front of an artwork at a museum. They spend around 4.5 minutes with the eye tracker. So they learn about art by actually learning about their perception. And it's for sure that they will have a far deeper connection to that artwork when they later see it in the galleries. The second installation is the portrait machine, a two-or multiplayer installation, and it's where the mental fitness center becomes quite physical because the models have to use their bodies to match a pose. And once they succeeded, we actually take a photo in order to create the collage with the artworks on top. So that's basically how we worked around the layering issue. And then the two can adjust and finish their collage together. As the museum director on the right, I did the collage. I'm still a designer, I guess. But it's been the most touching to really see how the portrait machine really engaged everybody. So we had the youngsters going completely crazy because we had a free-form mode, and once they figured it out, they went bananas. But it was also used a lot by the mature, as well as those who don't always have access. And this was my personal favorite moment from the opening, and really my personal compensation for all the crazy late nights during installation. Those kids, they did this for hours. It's crazy. The last installation is a recording booth. The visitors are invited to select an artwork and have a conversation about it, which can be extremely intimidating. Do you want to have a date? Let's go to the museum. Let's talk about an artwork. No. But they're actually prompted by surprising questions that actually trigger personal conversation. We are all experts on ourselves, so that helps. So we really wanted to provoke this kind of more lighthearted conversation that let you discover, first and foremost, something about each other. And we had the real pleasure to test our concept during his installation with the artist herself, Joanna Vasconcelos, and the museum director.
But what I'm wondering is what kind of sound will this chopper make? Can you try to make that sound?
A sound? I think I know. La 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 la. A Lady Gaga song, of course.
Of course. Yeah.
It's a Lady Gaga.
Yeah, but also
thing.
the sound of the feathers.
No. There would be the la 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 la.
A bit intimidating.
Yes, I think so. And who would come out of the helicopter?
Who would come out? Well, that's a good question. Obviously, Elton John.
Okay. Could be Elton John. We would like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he would fly beautifully.
So we then use speech-to-text technology to create a gift takeaway. And the last station is using the transparent OLED to overlay basically the video recording with the artwork. So visitors can listen to the conversations if they were standing basically behind the artwork. And so let's wrap this up with the final project video. And they lived happily ever after. So I think this definition is sort of the perfect and most succinct summary of my key points. A leader is anyone who holds her or himself accountable for finding potential in people and processes. I would just add one more thing. In order to create original and meaningful work, because to me the output is just as important as the process. So thanks for enduring my monologue, and I'm not sure if we have time for questions or 3 minutes. 3 minutes, shoot. So, yes.
How do you feel that the tech that you implement in these museums is like staying throughout the time frame? Like, do you have to upkeep it with the museums? Is there a relationship that goes on?
Yeah, that's a really good question about basically the concern that technology in museum gets old really quickly, which is definitely a concern that museums have. It depends basically on also what the expectation from the museum is, right? Like if they are like, oh, we have a permanent exhibition for the next 10 years, it's a different story when they're like, we want to really activate something for, let's say, 2 or 3 years. The Cleveland Museum that you saw at the beginning, that's from 2013, and I think there's like didn't age at all. So I think for us, it's always it's not just technology for technology's sake, but always kind of what is the story we're trying to tell, and then what is the best medium to actually do this. What is the best technology, and especially in our when it's full exhibitions and entire museums, there's a lot of analog to it. There's like where we're going with big architecture moves, where we're really using whatever is appropriate at what point. But it's a huge concern from the clients as well as from us too. So we're always trying to be mindful. Yes. When looking at what? Sorry.
When looking at your team.
Yeah.
That creatives often suffer from a lot of anxiety to fail.
Yeah.
How do you cope with that in yourself as well?
So the question was how that my observation that a lot of designers deal with a lot of anxiety to fail, and how I cope with myself, with myself. I have full honesty here now. I don't like to talk about that in public, but I'll do. I was very successful at BMD, and then really wanted to go to New York, and joined a company where I was fired after 8 months. It was something I thought was impossible, would never happen to me. Like my whole career before was like this. Like wherever I go, I was like super successful. I would have been the last person to fire, but it didn't fit. So I went through the whole imposter syndrome. Now, finally, they're smart enough to find out that I have nothing to offer. Despite everything that I've achieved before, all the projects I've done, no matter like 13 years of a really successful career, it's just like, it's nothing worth, right? Because there's this whole negativity bias that we totally cling to, that information that confirms that assumption that we have nothing to offer. So I really went through that, and kind of, this had to happen to be so obvious in my face that I have that issue, that I just had to work on it. And in the meantime, I think I'm getting a little bit older, and after that, also after joining local projects, and like this, ARoS was my first project that I deployed there in, I think, like 9 months. And they made me an equity partner after like 4 months, where it's just like, okay, let's balance this a little bit. So I think it was about sort of also understanding, where does your security come from? Do I identify completely and only with performance? Or like, what are actually my other qualities? And if there is an episode where something does not work out, to not identify with it as that is me, but as feedback for either my actions or what the situation was, and take that, because that's really, really important, valuable information, but not to identify completely with these moments of failure. I think this whole idea of like innovation and, oh, you have to fail all the time. This only works if you're actually able to sort of have distance to it so that you can take the information out of it. I think it's just like getting a little bit older, meditating a lot, talking with friends. I think talking like helped a lot with me, sharing those, like that sort of authentically. I have this totally kick-ass curative friend who has, so I was like, oh yeah, you don't want to like be part of the club where you're invited, right? Because to my own standards, I suck. And I'm like, you like what? You're crazy. You're brilliant. And she's like, yeah, it's not how I feel. So it's a very common. Oh, this is great. I love this. My favorite story about this. Some Ivy school, Ivy League school, this super special program where I think like 2,000 people applied for it. About like 12 people come in and get, and they all think that everybody else is brilliant, but 70% of them thought, like seriously, that something happened in their application process, and they're there by accident. So the math doesn't work, right? So these are like the most brilliant people out there, and 70% of them have the imposter syndrome while thinking that everybody else in the group is absolutely genius and brilliant. So we all deal with it. But I think like stopping to take things so personal and more sort of like feedback to the situation really helps. 0 minutes. Thank you.